Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to this evening's webinar brought to you by the Association of Muslim Schools. Today's webinar is titled, How are Muslim Schools Delivering RSE? Inshallah, over the next hour or so, we hope to go through this topic in a lot of detail with a panel that we've prepared for you. Before we get started, I'd just like to introduce myself. My name is Abdul Wadud Ahmed. I'm part of the RSE project team within the Association of Muslim Schools. The team is made up of a number of individuals, alhamdulillah, who are working tirelessly to try and support our schools up and down the country with regards to RSE. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the actual conversation itself, just a few housekeeping rules. This session is planned for an hour, so inshallah it should finish by no later than 7 o'clock. All delegates, inshallah, will be muted. If you would like to converse with with myself or the administrator, please do so on the chat. You do have the opportunity to, and you are encouraged to ask any questions. Our aim is to try and, inshallah, answer your questions through the dialogue that we plan to have with our panelists, and any questions that we're unable to answer, we'll try and get through them at the end, but failing that, inshallah, we'll do them offline through our FAQ page. Just to remind everybody, the session is being recorded and will be uploaded onto YouTube over the coming days. Now, before we get started, for some of you, you might be asking, who are AMS? So you might not be familiar. So just a brief introduction. AMS, the Association of Muslim Schools, is a membership organization representing Muslim schools across the UK. They've actually been in existence since 1992, and it has, alhamdulillah, membership of over 100 schools across the UK. Now, those 100 schools and more have a combined total of over 50,000 young people from across different phases of education. Alhamdulillah, that number is growing. The AMS is a body recognized by government, in particular the Department for Education. It frequently participates in various working groups and initiatives, one being that it participated and was part of the consultative process for RSE with the Department for Education. If you'd like to know anything further on AMS, please do jump onto the website, ams-uk.org. Okay. Inshallah, the next 55 minutes or so is going to be less about me, but more about our panel. Alhamdulillah, we've put together a small panel that will guide us through this conversation. Now, the panel's been constructed with people from within education, people who have an interest in RSE, but in the main, people who, alhamdulillah, have a good understanding of this particular topic and are able to share some of their insights, views and opinions, facts along the way. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel and then I'll get started on some of the questions. So the first person, alhamdulillah, is we have Sister Sumaira Butt. Sister Sumaira is a head teacher of a leading Muslim school in London, and alhamdulillah, she's a seasoned professional, has been in the sector for many years, and alhamdulillah, we're really pleased to have her. Next up, we have Brother Abdul Qadir, alhamdulillah, who's a teacher by profession, somebody who has a real passion and zeal for education and Islamic knowledge, learning, and being a young parent himself, has a real insight, and I know he's looked into this himself, so he'll be able to give another perspective as well. We then have, alhamdulillah, Brother Talal Hussein. Some of you who have listened in on previous webinars delivered by the association will be familiar with Brother Talal. Brother Talal is our RSE curriculum manager, or as I like to call him, the curriculum architect. Mashallah, got a lot of experience building curriculums, and as he's got himself more and more into this curriculum development, he's been really learning about the topic. Aside from that, he's another educationalist, has been involved in leading and developing schools. And finally, we have Brother Ashfaq Chadri. For many of you who are familiar with the AMS, you'll be familiar with Brother Ashfaq. He's the chairman of the Association of Muslim Schools, and also a leader of a secondary boys and girls school in the south of England. So alhamdulillah, that's our panel. First and foremost, Jazakallah khair to the four of you for giving up your Friday evening for this discussion. Like I said, it's going to be less about me and more about yourselves. Along the way, what I would ask is that, as I've mentioned before, if you do have any questions, we'll try and get them to our panelists. But what I have done is I've prepared some questions, inshallah, to ask our panelists. And from time to time, I will also ask the audience to participate through some polls that we will put up. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to go to my first question. And the first question that I have is for Brother Talal. And it's a really simple, straightforward question. Do Muslim schools have to teach RSE, and if so, why?
The simple answer is yes. The statutory guidance, Assalamu alaikum, by the way, but I got straight into the answering the question. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yeah, so the simple answer is yes. The statutory guidance, which I've gone through in detail in the two previous webinars, which both of which are available on the AMS website, states that all schools, state-funded and independent, have to teach relationships education at primary. So primary schools, they will teach relationships education. Sex education at primary is not statutory. Relationships and sex education at secondary. Additionally, you have parents have a right to withdraw their children from the sex education element of the RSE lessons, not the scientific and science part, but the sex education part. The parents have a right to withdraw. And health education is statutory for state-funded schools, including academies, not for independent schools. And why do Muslim schools have to teach RSE, and why do all schools have to teach RSE? The government feels that young people need to be prepared for the challenges of growing up in society, so that they can better navigate relationships. This includes, family relationships, friends, relationship between friends and peers, and sexual relationships. And the government wants young people to be better prepared, to be able to keep safe online, especially with all the challenges that are there. And that's probably the main reason why RSE has come as a statutory requirement now for all schools.
Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khair, Brother Talal. So we get an understanding from Brother Talal that Muslim schools do have to teach RSE, and then some of the reason and the rationale as to why. Inshallah, as the session goes on, we'll get into a little bit more of the detail. Before I go to to my next question, I just wanted to ask the audience a question. Actually, on your screen, you should come up a poll. I wonder if the audience would be kind enough just to give us an idea of as to if they understand which phase of education is the government's RSE guidance targeted at. Is it specifically at secondary? Is it primary? Is it nursery? Is it university? Is it across the spectrum? It'd be useful for us to know where people's thinking with regards to this is. I'll leave it up for a minute or so, and inshallah give people an opportunity to answer. But in the meantime, I'm going to go to my next question. So this is pitched at our chairman, Brother Ashfaq. Brother Talal explained to us how Muslim schools do have to teach RSE, and he explained some of the reason, the rationale behind it. And alhamdulillah, it seems like from the poll that I've just launched that alhamdulillah, most of the audience also understand which phase the RSE curriculum is targeted towards. And my question to you, Ashfaq Bhai, is that how can it be that Muslim schools are teaching RSE, yet we hear that other faith schools are not? There's a lot of media, a lot of publicity about who's doing what. And I wanted to understand if you could share with the audience as to why Muslim schools have made the decision to teach RSE if others are not.
I think that's a wrong perception that others are not. If you look across faith groups, because I suppose that's the easiest comparison that we can have, is what other faith groups are doing. So, for example, our audience could easily explore, and I think it'd be a nice one to explore, is Catholic Education Service, which is the next sort of religious body that's very similar in ethos as well as values as the Muslim community. If you go on their website, very prominently, they highlight their RSE curriculum and what they're doing about it. Sometimes it's better not to get into protests, but handling things in a gentle way, but also very objectively, and stop where the red lines are. I think that's the way forward. The association has taken that. We've seen similarly the National Society, but I suppose it has a much more liberal approach to RSE. You've got the Jewish community, so you've got the Board of Deputies of the British Jews, who are very much pro teaching RSE, and the curriculum is quite liberal. You've got the Association of the Orthodox Jewish Schools, which of course are the only body that has directly objected. But what the association has done is to understand where things stand, that we've been actively liaising with everybody to understand their views, their concerns, but at the same time being able to make an informed decision. As you're aware, the association is on its third year of engagement. In fact, I think if we count this year, it is coming to nearly 3.5 years of engagement on RSE, long before it hit the headlines or unfortunate protests that happened in Parkview and the other schools, where there was, unfortunately, I would be quite objective in saying that the school wasn't flexible enough and did not respect the views of the parents enough. I mean, that's a very objective view I can share with you. The association, by the way, was involved in Excelsior Academy Chains, which actually is the sponsor for Parkview, the old Parkview schools, as well as where the protest took place, to go and challenge the academy chain about, that they need to accommodate their parents more. And secondly, also to challenge the head teacher on their views about how they viewed, how the parents' concerns were there. Yes, unfortunately, the parents took to protest and so forth, but unfortunately, many of their concerns were legitimate. So we were there to raise those views. So the position that we took, that it is indeed a very challenging topic for the Muslims, but unfortunately, when it's statutory, if you have to operate a school, you will have to find or navigate your way through statutes. There is really no other way around it. So what we chose to take is the pragmatic approach, which is understanding what is happening around us, engaging very early on with the RSE team and Sir Ian Bokum as well. We had a private meeting with him to again air our concerns every step of the way. And the last time we engaged with Sir Ian Bokum was only 4 weeks back. Again, where we found something that is of concern to us, we raised it, and it's all minuted. So that's the approach we have actually chosen to take, because there's no point leading to protests. Sometimes the protests don't give you the outcome that you're looking for, but challenging things pragmatically, systematically is the way forward. And hence, that's why the association is trying to take this difficult task of devising an RSE curriculum, which is faith sensitive, which meets the needs of the Muslim community and its children and its parents, respects our faith, respects the red lines of our faith, but at the same time is something that will make sure that the schools are compliant. So that is, in a nutshell, the summary of why and what we ended up doing.
Jazakallah khair, brother Ashfaq. So what we understand from that is that the AMS has been involved in discussions with the department for a number of years on this topic. And alhamdulillah, it sounds like it's had the opportunity to air the views of its members and the wider Muslim community possibly. And alhamdulillah, taking the initiative to actually try and support some of its schools with relevant materials, which I'm sure we'll come on to a little bit later. My next question is, there's an understanding that state schools and independent schools, i.e. in this case faith schools, can take a slightly different approach to the teaching of RSE. So my question to Brother Talal is the teaching of RSE different for faith schools?
In a nutshell, faith schools, including Islamic schools, are able to teach their faith perspective on particular issues. To be honest, I would say that all schools can approach the teaching of RSE in this way if they so chose. You know, even state schools could do this. Generally, what would happen is that faith schools, like Islamic schools, they would emphasize the teachings of their faith on particular issues. All other schools, they must, and the statutory guidance says they must take into account the views of parents and their faith perspective. So even state schools should, Brother Ashfaq was just mentioning, they should be consulting with the parents, and parents should be involved in the process of developing the curriculum and reviewing the curriculum, and the whole process of what is going to be taught. The parents should be involved in that. State schools should, all schools must take the view of parents. Faith schools, yeah, we would, as Islamic schools, we would teach the particular faith perspective. So, for example, the issue of same-sex relationships, for example. So, from an Islamic perspective, we would teach from an Islamic perspective, same-sex relationships are not allowed. So the thing is, once you mention faith perspectives, then you also have to mention the legal position as well. So for marriage, the marriage position from an Islamic point of view would be, the faith perspective from an Islamic point of view would be that marriage is between a man and a woman. And however, legally, the legal perspective is that same-sex in England, marriage can be between the same sex or opposite sexes. So, for Islamic schools, faith schools generally, you would just generally just teach they have more emphasis on your faith perspective.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Talal. So, alhamdulillah, from that we understand that when we are teaching this topic to our young people, we are allowed to give an Islamic perspective on the actual conversation. And alhamdulillah, it sounds like it will make the conversation that little bit more informed for the educator and for the audience that they're teaching. My next question is for Brother Abdul Qadir. And there's a lot of people within the wider community who ask this question, and maybe it's misunderstood, but maybe we haven't done enough to clarify. Maybe the people within our community haven't done enough. But I want you to see if we can start exploring this this question as to whether or not there is space for RSE within Islam. Does Islam allow for us to bring up the conversation, bring up the topic, to explore the idea of the topics that you would find within the RSE guidance? Brother Abdul Qadir, over to you.
Assalamu alaikum, jazakallahu khair. I think this is a really important question, and just to point out that it's really important that we don't try to shoehorn RSE within Islam or any other topic as such. So we're not trying to fit in this package of RSE that has been presented to us necessarily in Islam, but rather the way I want to approach this question is to see what does Islam teach us about the strands pertaining to this subject, like, for example, families and having respectful relationships, sexual relationships. So what I'd like to look at it from that point of view, if you like to consider the first statutory guidance that we should be connecting to, we would say that these are the sources of Islam, the Quran and the Sunnah as such. So that's the sort of angle that I'd like to approach this. If we look at the overarching aims of the Sharia, for example, the scholars in the past have researched this area, this science of maqasid al-Sharia, the objective of the Sharia, and they've categorized 5 distinctive categories which preserve the human being and provides the human rights. And from those 5 characteristics, one of those characteristics is the protection and the dignity and of the family. So the protection, the preservation of a family life and dignity. Now, when we look at the themes of RSE, a lot of these aspects fall under this similar objective. So having healthy families, having respectful relationships, making sure that we are safe from what we may consider ills of the society, and having healthy relationships. These all come under this particular objective and strand in the maqasid al-Sharia, in the overarching aims of the Sharia. So here's a pathway that allows us to explore and to understand how we can live a healthy life where there is the protection of the dignity and the family life. So that's one sort of general aspect that I just want to point out. The second thing is, and this is referring to more of the contentious issues maybe that pertain to the RSE. Now, as contentious as they may be, there may be room for us, and not maybe, actually, there is room for us to actually inquire about these issues. When we look at a narration presented by our illustrious companion, Hudhayfa bil Yaman in Al-Bukhari, it's a really interesting narration because in it, it's a long narration. I'm just going to read out the first part of it. It says, the people used to ask the Prophet of Allah about the good, but I used to ask him about the evil for fear that it might overtake me. So what it's saying in this narration that Hudhayfa bil Yaman used to ask about the evil, the people used to ask about good. So for us to build a moral compass for our children, we need to allow them a platform to inquire about that which is halal, that which is haram, that which is good, that which may be considered evil or bad. Now, in this way, we are allowing our children to make those choices and developing a moral compass for them, presenting them that information. Now, this hadith goes on to mention how the challenges of the society will keep on increasing and becoming more intense over time, which is quite relevant as well in the days that we're seeing and the experiences that our children are facing in this society now, because the challenges they face are much greater than some of ours and different. So that's my second point in terms of inquiring about some of these contentious issues. Is there room for that? If it is relevant, if it is age appropriate, and if it is managed through an Islamic narrative, yes, there is a room for this. Finally, we can take a particular example from the life of the Prophet. When our children are living in a multicultural society, and it's no doubt that they're going to be exposed to different views, different ways of life, and different ideas that people have. Now, this is just part and parcel of living amongst different people. And this was the case at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And this particular example pertains to this quite significantly. When the Muhajirun, the people of Makkah, when they migrated to Medina, there was marriage between the migrants and the Ansar, the people of Medina. Now, during that time, the women of Medina complained to the Prophet ﷺ. They were a bit surprised about the way that the men, the Muhajirun, the migrants, the way they approached their women and the way they expressed their intimacy, marital intimacy. Now, this question went back to the Prophet ﷺ, and as a result of this, an ayah was brought down in the Quran to educate and to teach the people what would be a healthy way to approach marital intimacy. To explore this further, I mean, if any of the audience want to explore this further, they can look at the tafsir of Surah Baqarah, ayah 222. My point being is, I mean, I'm addressing this as a concerned father and an educator rather than someone providing an Islamic position. But my challenge for me and my children was, where do I stand, and is there an opportunity for me to open a channel, a platform to engage with my children about these issues that they're going to face? And we can see from these general guidance from the Quran and the Sunnah that there is an avenue to explore these issues that our children are going to face.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Abdul Qadir. Alhamdulillah. There's the narrations that you've mentioned and the references that you've given from an Islamic point of view just reinforces, alhamdulillah, that Islam is all encompassing, that there's an answer to everything, and all we have to do is look, and inshallah we will find it. So inshallah, I will be coming back to you a little bit later on to ask you for your view and your perspective as a young father as to how you plan to pursue this particular topic, maybe at home or in other places. Sister Samara, mashallah, you run a very successful school in London, as some of the audience will probably know, and the wider community, and I'm pretty sure that you've started the process well before today with regards to engaging with parents around RSE. I'd like to understand what's been the feedback from parents, both from initially, maybe when this went public, the guidance was shared, through to actually holding consultations with the parents themselves. How has that been? How's that experience been? And maybe how have you tackled some difficult situations? Sister Samara.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. On this issue, we actually consulted our parents 2.5 years ago now, almost, not long after the statutory guidance first came out. We had actually run a consultation a few years before that, when we were further developing our own PSHE curriculum, because we have two schools. So I'm the head of a maintained school that we opened about 2.5 years ago, and an independent, which we've had for about 17, 18 years. So we ran a consultation with our independent parents a number of years ago about what they wanted in the PSHE curriculum. As you know, the independent schools do have to legally teach PSHE, and obviously that's a very good thing. It's personal social health education, which is an important ingredient of any curriculum. And actually it's been non-statutory in the maintained sector. So in so-called government-funded schools, they haven't had to actually teach that by law, but many schools had introduced it, or elements of it. So this RSHE guidance, this statutory guidance, is actually the first bit of statutory PSHE the government has ever imposed on schools, and to be honest. And actually, in my view, it really helps faith schools immensely, because before that there was nothing there was no framework in place. So that meant that Ofsted went into independent schools, and they had their own idea of what the PSHE curriculum should look like and what it should teach. And it didn't have any room in its understanding for a faith perspective, whereas this guidance actually is excellent for faith schools, because it allows that. It certainly tells us to teach from a faith perspective. So I put all of that actually to parents at the second consultation I did across both schools, the voluntary aided and the independent. And I presented the statutory guidance to them and explored some of the issues that it threw up. For us as a school, because we were very confident, had very well developed PSHE curriculum because of our earlier consultation, we went further. We asked parents whether they wanted us to teach their children sex education for the first time. Now, at the first consultation that we had done, we realised we needed, and there was a lot of pressure actually by Ofsted on independent schools at that time to talk about homophobic bullying. And it seemed to be an issue that came up quite frequently with schools, and it created a lot of worry and anxiety amongst parents. So we thrashed all those issues out, and our parents had understood that actually what's going on is our children are growing up in a society in which they're going to leave the safe confines of a Muslim primary, which is teaching from their faith perspective, and then soon going to go to a secondary school in which a lot of these issues are going to emerge and be quite challenging for those children and parents. And as soon as, just 6 weeks after leaving the school, they enter a new school environment like this. So we'd already introduced at year 6 some notions of homophobic bullying, some ideas of what is homosexuality, and then link that back to Islamic teachings of that being obviously a forbidden lifestyle. So in this latest stage of consultation, we were just building, what we really did was an audit against the statutory guidance to see what else do we need to put in. We found that it was really the new elements on health education and mental well-being that we needed to pop in there. And other than that, it was up to parents whether they wanted us to teach sex education. Now they've had the same, actually they came to us with a lot of anxiety, not a huge amount because there was a lot of trust between us and our parents. We worked hard at that and obviously that we were in a very good place to build on that trust. But there was a lot of anxiety because it was around that time that all of the protests had been going on in Birmingham surrounding the No Outsiders programme, and that had been well publicised in the media. So parents everywhere became anxious, actually. Socially conservative parents and religious parents and Islamic parents everywhere became quite anxious. So we did get phone calls and I kept saying, well, hold on, we're going to run a consultation and I explain everything to you. So we held that. So that was 2.5 years ago. I presented the statutory guidance to them and explained its length and breadth and the fact that as a faith school, we could teach from our faith perspective very comfortably. And that we would also teach the legal position, but not in a way that promotes something which is forbidden in the faith, only in a way that our children are prepared for life in modern society, understanding what they will see around them and what the law permits, therefore. And only as much as needed, to be honest. But we had the opportunity to talk about sex education again and ask our parents what they felt about that. Obviously, we've got a lot of seasoned parents. We've got parents who've got children in secondary school, so they were well aware that not only are children exposed to a lot of issues to do with same-sex relationships at secondary, but of course, as soon as they join in year 7, they're learning reproduction, human reproduction in science in the autumn term. And so for that reason, there was a wide acknowledgement that actually the children are ill prepared if they haven't had an Islamic and a wholesome sort of value-based approach to sexual relationships, towards family, towards marriage, before suddenly being confronted with these pictures and this teaching, this curriculum in year 7 science. So they've left the safe confines of Muslim school, had a wonderful 6 weeks with their parents, then bang, they're in secondary learning these sorts of things. So our parents felt that it would be a good idea that our children at the end of year 6, 3 weeks before the end of the year, actually get a primer from their teachers, girls and boys separately with different teachers. And we actually give parents the plans, and then parents can do some work with their children over the summer holiday to prepare them for secondary school. And that's really what we've been working on since. Obviously, the lockdown came in the middle of everything, so it sort of derailed our programme last year. But we've now got some draft plans for that, which we've now created a working party with our parents to finalise, really, because we really need to know from them how far do you want us to go, the perspective we're taking in the whole approach we're taking in explaining sexual relationships, the married sexual relationship. And inshallah, bi'idhnillah, they will give us a lot of good insights about the sort of language, how far we should go, and that will help us finalise our curriculum, prepare our resources, and then inshallah deliver that at the end of the year 6. So in a long nutshell, that was what we've done so far with parents.
Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khair, Sister Samara. One of the things that I really took from what you said was trust. And alhamdulillah, I think if we look at some examples, there's been difficult situations in the media around this particular topic. Trust has been one of those overarching values, or that's just been mentioned. And I think one thing with our Muslim schools is, alhamdulillah, first and foremost, I think the vast majority of parents actually trust the people that they give in their children to. And I think in most cases with most of our Muslim schools, I think our parents should feel reasonably trustworthy of the people that they're handing their kids over to. So that's great. I wonder if the audience wouldn't mind getting involved for a moment before we go on to the next question. I wanted to understand from the audience how they would interpret what is age appropriate. I'm just going to launch a poll now. There's a common theme that's been asked by many parents, educators, commentators about when is it age appropriate to teach the content associated with RSE? And I wanted to understand from the audience how who they think should define what is age appropriate. So should it be the people who are developing the curriculum? Should it be the teacher? Should it be our leaders of our community, our imams, our sheikhs? Should it be the individual parents? It'd be great to understand where you think this kind of responsibility should lie. I'll leave that up for a minute or so whilst the audience come back with some of their responses. Brother Talal, I want to understand from yourself with the kind of experience that you've had and the involvement that you have in kind of developing the curriculum. Before we go into the work that you've done in supporting the AMS in developing the curriculum, that aside, what resources can Muslim schools use when teaching RSE?
All schools can either use published resources, or they can create their own in terms of for RSE. The key thing, like Sister Sumaira mentioned, is consultations with parents, with staff, with pupils, so that the resources are shared and feedback is taken on board from the consultations. And you touched upon it as well, the trust is there. The trust is there between the school, the teachers, the parents, the pupils. And really, Muslim schools should consider a few things when they are either purchasing RSE resources or developing them. They should ask themselves some questions. Are the resources from an Islamic perspective? Is the narrative clear? I mentioned previously on the webinars, and I shared some resources that are out there which have a clear narrative. There's a clear narrative there. There's one resource I shared which has a narrative about gender fluidity, and it starts at year 2. They mention about gender fluidity at year 2. So the narrative, when Muslim schools consider resource, they should think, is it from an Islamic perspective? Does it have a clear narrative? And is it sound as well? It's not just, the Islamic narrative. Is it sound and authentic? Next, they should think about, does the resource fulfill statutory requirements? Does it meet the statutory content required to be taught? Are the resources engaging? Do they allow for controlled discussion? Something Brother Abdul Qadir mentioned about having a platform, having a place where our children can explore those issues that are prevalent in society, which may be considered haram, which may be considered bad. So is there opportunity? Do the resources allow for a controlled discussion? And really, and something again, I think maybe you mentioned with age appropriateness. Are they age appropriate? At what age? And this is again, a question for schools to think about: is age appropriateness? Not necessarily age appropriateness is the same across all schools, and you have to know your children, and you have to know your environment, your community, and you match your resources and your approach to that. And essentially, do the resources prepare young people, young Muslims, for the challenges they are facing and they will face growing up in this country? And that's really key. That's what we want, isn't it? I mean, the point of our schools is not just to keep them safe, to prepare them for society and the challenges that exist there, and be ready to be able to counter the challenges out there in a confident way. I mean, when I was working with Ilm to Amal, developing a curriculum there, we used to have this kind of our kind of approach was we want our children to be well-rounded Muslims. We want them to be well-rounded Muslims, confident, active, ethical. So we want to instill in them these qualities so they're able to navigate the challenges that exist.
Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khair, brother Talal. Alhamdulillah, I think one of the things, consistent messages that's coming through from all of the panelists is that there is actually a need for us to teach this, and there is a space by which we can teach this if we do things properly. As to Sister Samara's point, we engage with our parents as part of the consultation process, we build that trust, and actually we have, alhamdulillah, some flexibility to ensure that it is age appropriate and it is relevant to our audience. And I'm pretty sure every Muslim school is making sure that it is relevant, it is appropriate, and it's in line with the kind of guidelines of our faith. So alhamdulillah, that's great to hear. I wonder if, Brother Talal, if I could just go back to you again. You're obviously heavily involved in building the RSE curriculum that's been commissioned by the Association of Muslim Schools, AMS. Could you maybe just share with the audience as to how you're actually approaching the developing lesson plans for sensitive topics? What kind of factors are you considering along the way?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to pretty much repeat. That's maybe well, I will kind of repeat some of the things I mentioned in the previous answer to the previous question. You know, with our approach to tackling sensitive issues, you know, as schools, we need to consider, you know, does the content have to be taught, or does it have to be taught? You know, is there a statutory requirement for it? What's the legal perspective on it, on the content? What's the Islamic perspective on it? You know, and is the Islamic perspective secure and sound from a scholarly point of view? What approach is being used by the teachers when they are delivering these sensitive issues? They created a safe space. Is there, you know, are all the children aware of, you know, creating an environment which allows for, you know, controlled discussion? Has the content being shared with parents through consultation? Are clear logical arguments presented to why some things are not allowed? It's not enough just to say it's haram. You know, is there a narrative around it which explains reasoning, the rationale why this is allowed in Islam and this is not allowed in Islam? Additionally, you know, because you want to teach these sensitive issues in a particular way, are broader faith perspectives discussed and shared. And so there's a particular way to build a narrative that, and I gave an example in the previous webinar about the lesson was around sexual pressure and choosing to delay sex. And there's different ways to approach this. One way to approach this lesson and these objectives was to look at why generally young people choose to delay sex. What the faith perspectives on sex outside marriage? What's the Islamic perspective on sex outside marriage? And what is sexual pressure? How do we manage sexual pressure? In what way? What can we practically do to deal with it? So the broader narrative needs to be there in terms of dealing with sensitive issues. And on another side, we've got the teachers as well. Are the teachers confident to deliver the content? Yeah. So one is the content prepared in such a way that is meets all these requirements, these points I've mentioned. And then the next thing is, are the teachers confident in delivering it? Have they been given the training? Have they got the support there? Can they refer to additional support to help them? Is there, I would say, is there a network of teachers, a network available for a dialogue? Can they resort to some scholarly advice as well? So one is the planning approach. That's what we're doing as from AMS, where we're putting a curriculum together which meets these the planning aspect of it. And then the next part is preparing our staff members, our teachers, so they feel confident enough to deliver it. And that's where the training aspect will come into it. And that's maybe something that Brother Abdul, you can mention about AMS and the training aspect as well.
No problem. Jazakallah khair, Brother Talal. Alhamdulillah. I remember when I got involved in this project quite early on, and it's morphed into something quite huge. And Talal and I quite regularly talk about how it went from a seed, a simple development delivery of a model policy to a full-blown out scheme of work and much more. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier on, Brother Talal, in what you explained was that it's making sure that when we are having these discussions that there is a narrative, there is a rationale, there is a reasoning, and so along the way we need to ensure that we are educating, alhamdulillah, our young people to understand what is right and what is wrong, what is halal and what is haram, etc. But also giving them the confidence to be able to know that and to be able to uphold that. Alhamdulillah, I think with the work that you're doing, it's I'm confident, inshallah, we're going to get there. So that kind of leads me on quite nicely, actually, to Brother Ashfaq. Now, why has the Association of Muslim Schools decided to get involved in the delivery of the RSE curriculum? Why is it that it's decided that it wants to invest time, money, effort, energy, trips to Downing Street or to see representatives of the government? Why has the association decided that it wants to be this involved and it wants to be at the forefront of delivery?
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me okay, Brother Abdul Wadud, this time?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Jazakallah. I think the first motivating factor for us, initially we actually chose to try and find a partner who we could actually partner up with to be able to work alongside a large curriculum body who would make it customized for Muslim schools. We started the journey with Discovery Education, who wanted to start off with primary and then grow into secondary. The initial conversation was that they're going to go into much more, not just faith sensitive, but perhaps the potential for customization for faith schools. But unfortunately, that never materialized. They made it much more, Discovery Education made it much more faith friendly, but didn't go into the customization. The second sort of attempt that we tried to do is with our partners in the Dutch partners. In fact, they in their country actually had RSE statutory much before us, many years before us, and had developed a curriculum which already was meeting their national standards and was acceptable to their equivalent of Ofsted as well as Department for Education. We tried to work together, but unfortunately what happened is that when the final RSE curriculum outline was published, we found out that the Dutch curriculum wasn't covering even half of what we needed in the UK. So unfortunately, that partnership did not materialize. However, that partnership is going ahead with a different model, perhaps, inshallah, now looking at the madrasa sector to look at that angle where, faith-sensitive RSE needs to be taught, because RSE is taught in mainstream schools, so the faith-sensitive part of it, or explaining the faith perspective on it, needs to be taught in madrasas. So failing that attempt, we actually then thought that there was really no other option but to invest in this. There is a significant amount of financial investment that the association is doing into this. And unfortunately, even if all our member schools were to purchase the schemes of work from the association, it will still not break even. So there's a financial investment, there's sponsorships, and lots of other resources being put in. The whole idea is twofold. One is we want to make sure that our schools do not fail the independent school standards just because of the fact that they could not show enough evidence of teaching of RSE to the statutes. The second one was around the motivation that we wanted this opportunity to teach our children RSE from an Islamic perspective. Indeed, we wanted to turn this challenge into an opportunity because out there, no matter we like it or not, the world is an open platform and it's a global city at the moment. Children are exposed to all sorts of ideas and concepts. If we then as Muslims fail to give them the faith perspective, this is perhaps, in our own schools, and indeed, inshallah, if this curriculum could go into state schools and perhaps madrasas as well at the same time, this will be the only opportunity to explain to them our faith perspective. When they grow up, become older, hopefully, inshallah, they will remember this. And it will become a sadaqah jariyah for all of us, inshallah, in the future. So that is really the perspective and the reasons behind us coming into this project.
Jazakallah khair, brother Ashfaq. Alhamdulillah, it sounds like quite a journey that the team has been on from 3.5 years ago through to working with colleagues in the Netherlands, and then trying to obviously engage with partners over here. And alhamdulillah, I've seen firsthand how great it's been actually to be part of this journey, and inshallah Allah accept it from all of us, the efforts that we're putting into this. Ameen. As we come towards the end of the session, brothers and sisters, we might spill over by 5 minutes. I'll try and keep it no longer than 5, maybe 10. I just got a couple of more questions really, and then we'll bring it to a close. The next question really is, Brother Abdul Qadir, mashallah, a young parent, somebody who's in the sector, somebody who works in the state sector, has had experience from an organizational level in Muslim schools. How comfortable are you about your children being taught RSE?
Jazakallah khair. It depends. I mean, RSEs and the schemes of work that are available, that are being taught from one state school to another, from a Muslim school to another, is very different. For me, and I go back to the strands that are pertaining to RSE rather than this RSE package, because I think what's happened is that there's a stigma attached to this term RSE. When we hear that term RSE, often what comes to mind for most people is all the contentious issues that are relating to it. And hopefully we're trying to move away from that and provide and AMS are trying to provide a mind, shift in mindset of that, because we are looking at it from a different approach. So the strands in RSE are really important for me as a parent. I mean, building families, respect for relationships, and obviously my children are quite young. They're not at the age where sexual relationships is something that would be age appropriate for them. And but the other aspects and strands for me as a parent, they're really important. And not only just as a parent, I mean, when we look at what our children are facing, in the society, whether it be what they're accessing online, and being online, it's very normal. I've got a 6-year-old and a 10-month-old. My 10-month-old baby, he grew up seeing a device. So as soon as he's born and he's come into this world, a device was a normal thing for him to see. And that's very different from our upbringing. So what they're access to, what they're exposed to, the types of different challenges that they're facing is very different to ours. And I just want to kind of sort of draw on some of my personal experiences. My father was first generation and I'm second generation. So when I was brought up in school, there were many challenges that I faced, but I didn't have those platforms necessary at home to discuss them. They were almost taboo subjects. So some of these subjects that we talk about, they've almost become taboo. And part of the reason might be because parents at the time didn't acknowledge that these challenges were there, or maybe they didn't know how to address them, or they didn't understand the impact that it might have. So I kind of grew up stumbling through these things myself and, navigating and trying my best as I can. And as I matured, I realized some of the past mistakes I made. Now, as a parent, you always want to use your own life experience to protect and to help your children and guide them. So for me, it's really important to provide these platforms and these channels for my children to be able to talk to me about it. And as an educator myself, I feel quite confident that I can add to their education of RSE from a faith perspective. However, there are parents out there that might not be able to deal with that may not be able to approach that. And that's why platforms such as an Islamic faith perspective in a school, or whether it be in the madrasa, these channels need to exist, because otherwise they're going to continue to be taboo subjects. And whilst we know that there are problems in the society, we're not talking about it. So I really strongly feel that these channels of discussion need to be open, and they have to be a different, variation of channels, because not everyone will have their children in a Muslim school. A large majority of our families go to state schools. So these channels need to be open. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is provide our children with a compass to navigate through this life. They're in this map, and they've got all these choices to make as they come to each junction of life, and there's moral decisions they have to make. Now, if we leave them to their own devices and not provide these channels of communication, then they will be left with a moral compass which may be confusing, which will not enable them to appropriately choose right from wrong. And it doesn't mean to say that, you know, they don't make mistakes along the way, or we didn't make mistakes along the way, because that's part of the learning curve. However, we want to, as parents, try to avoid our children from making those mistakes as much as possible by giving them the tools to enable to make informed choices when they come to those junctions in life.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Abdul Qadir. I think with what you said, there's a lot of parents, a lot of grandparents, a lot of brothers and sisters who can resonate with that when they look at the way they grew up and the way that society is today. I think there is a need for this, going back over the last 55 minutes or an hour or so through the discussion. And it's about opening a platform, a safe space where this discussion can happen. But it can happen in a way that's obviously allows us to express the views and the perspective of our faith. I wonder how the audience feels a little bit about that. I want to put a question out to everybody. I'd like to ask everybody, if RSE was not mandated, do you think Muslim schools should teach RSE? And I'll go one step further, actually. I'll say, if RSE was not mandated, do you think the Muslim community should be teaching RSE? Should our masjids, should our elders, should our schools, you know, the people who are in a position of authority and power, should they be having, should we be having khutbahs around this particular topic? I think it's really important that we understand, you know, where the gaps are within our own community first and foremost, so that we can, inshallah, share them and understand what we can do about it. And looking at the results that I'm just sharing, an overwhelming majority feel as though even if the RSE guidance was not mandated, we should be talking about it. Okay, so to my final question of the evening, and then I've got a little bit to close, is to Sister Samara. Alhamdulillah, you shared with us, Sister, the journey that your school's been on, and Alhamdulillah, it started 2.5 years ago, and as you mentioned earlier on, there's an element of trust that's been built, and it seems like, mashallah, you're quite well prepared. I just want to ask you a little bit about what your next steps are now. Where do you go from here? What are your plans with regards to developing your curriculum, getting your parents involved, how you plan to roll this out? And I'd also like to ask you whether as a school, you have to, you're instructed to use your local authorities scheme of work, because that's another challenge I feel is in the wider community, which is some of our state sector schools are having to use schemes that are being mandated to them by their local authority. So 2 questions there. One is, do you have to use your local authority's scheme of work? Do you fall under that banner? And then the second part of it is, what's your next steps?
Actually, schools can't be forced to use the local authorities' curriculum. Maintained schools don't have to use them. I imagine schools who are in a situation like that may have entered some sort of an agreement with them, but I think that very unlikely. The legal onus is on the school to consult with parents and to put its curriculum together. And I would imagine that would fall on to the last legal authority would pass on to the governing body of that school. So, local authorities shouldn't be able to force a school to teach their own curriculum. As a school and a faith school, alhamdulillah, this statutory guidance is fine for us. It helps us to tweak our curriculum a bit more, add in bits, which we think are really helpful about health education and mental health and mental well-being. And as I said, the non-statutory bit, which the statutory guidance offers nothing for, which is the sex education, that we're writing plans for, as I said earlier on. We've drafted those plans, we've created a working party, we're about to launch that and present the plans to them to finalise them in terms of the extent to which we go. I'm of the view that when we teach this subject, we need to teach it from the point of view of a healthy Islamic married relationship, and for children to understand and be able to see themselves in that in the future, to setting up new families of their own and having healthy, loving relationships with their spouses, in which sexual intimacy is a part of that. However, the language that comes up when talking from that perspective, to me, sounds a bit too secondary. So those are the questions I've got for my parents. Is this going too far? To what degree should we take this? We talk about the act itself. To what degree do you want to do this? You know, and how should we frame that? So that's, the parents are really going to help us. Obviously, I'm a seasoned parent myself. I have grandchildren, in fact, so I have been there, as it were. However, I want to hear from a group of parents. So we did write to parents, and we have formed that working party, so they'll help me with that. And then, inshallah, we'll finalise those plans, and come summer term, we will do a workshop for the parents of Year 6, share those plans with them, give them a copy so they can go over those things and go into as much depth as they need during the summer holiday. And during the last 3 weeks of the year, actually teach this for the first time, boys with one of our Islamic studies ustads, and the girls with their female class teacher. Really, those are our plans at the moment. You know, in terms of the tweaks and the amendments, the additions we're making to our PSHE plans, those will continue half term to half term as we write them. But I think we're in a very strong position. And again, it goes back to that word trust, because our parents, and that really does go, it boils down to, obviously, a good school should develop trust with parents. But in a faith community, it's so much easier, isn't it, than if you're in a state, if you're in a maintained school where they've got to forge a curriculum from so many different disparate groups, have got different views on these things. It's much more difficult for them.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Samira. It sounds like, mashallah, you've got this one in hand, and alhamdulillah, a really good model example for schools in general, whether it be state schools or Muslim schools, as to how to go about approaching this particular topic, and to build that trust and that relationship with parents along the way. Before everybody disappears, I just want 2 more minutes of your time, please. First and foremost, Jazakallah khair to our panel, Sister Samira, Brother Abdul Qadir, Brother Talal, and Brother Ashfaq. Thank you for giving your time again. Alhamdulillah, everything that you said has been very, very useful. I'm sure that it comes from a place of sincerity, and it comes from a place of knowledge. And I'm certain that, inshallah, this webinar that you've participated in is going to go very far and wide, and inshallah a lot of people will benefit, and you will get the ajr for it, inshallah. Ameen. Before we finish, unfortunately we don't have any time for Q&A. We are 10 minutes over. If there are any questions, inshallah, I'll pick them up with Sister Shazia outside of this session, and we'll try and address them over email or on our FAQ page. Just wanted to let everybody know that the Association of Muslim Schools does have a YouTube page. So everything that we've previously done on RSE is available for you to watch. So as you can see, we've already got 4 videos up. Inshallah, this will be the 5th one. You can find a little bit more about the actual scheme of work that we've developed, how Brother Talal and his team have been focusing on particular subjects that are more difficult than others, and how the approach the association will be taking on those, and also a model example of a parent consultation that you can view. We also have an RSE hub on the website, ams-uk.org/RSE. All things RSE. You can download free RSE resources, model policies, long-term planning, all sorts of things that can get you started on your journey, all sorts of things that can get you as a parent, can empower you to recommend as an alternative to your school. Inshallah, we're developing some training. We've developed some parent consultation resources, PowerPoint presentations, guidance from CFE, etc. We have a dedicated email address for all things RSE. So if you have any comments, if you have any inquiry, if you need support, please do email us and inshallah we'll get back to you. All of our events are on the page as well. And you can buy our scheme. So Brother Talal and his team are working tirelessly behind the scenes, developing the scheme of work for both primary and secondary. I think in total there'll be circa close to 140 individual lessons. So there's a lot of work going into that. It's available to both primary and secondary, and the AMS member schools get a slight discount on that as well. And then finally, we've got an FAQ page where we try and answer the most common kind of frequent questions. And that's something that's constantly evolving and we're updating as we go. Finally, if you want to get involved, if you're a school, get involved in, inshallah, the pilot phase. We are looking for a couple of people to expand the team, a lesson writer and a trainer. And then finally, we've got a short little survey that I'll follow up with following this webinar that you can participate in. So that leaves me to say thank you to everybody who's listened in. Thank you to our panel again. Jazakallah khair to everybody in the background. I pray that inshallah Allah gives us success on this journey that we're going through, and Allah accepts our efforts. And for all those people who are going through difficulty, inshallah Allah give them ease and comfort for them as individuals and their family. Inshallah Allah keep us all safe. Inshallah we at some point can meet in person, and it'll be nice to get back to some sort of normality. So apologies, went 12 minutes over, but again, this will be available on YouTube, so feel free to watch it, to share it with the wider community. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.